Good morning, everyone. PURIM Sameach. Happy PURIM. This will be the morning reading of the Book of Esther, Ghilath Esther. As we see in chapter 9 of the Book of Esther, which you can find in the Hebrew Bible, also known as the Old Testament. Chapter 9 of the Book of Esther, verse 20, we see, and Mordechai inscribed these things in this book, the contents of this book, and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, to enjoin them to make the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day thereof every year as the days when the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month that was reversed for them from grief to joy and from mourning to a festive day, to make them days of feasting and joy, and sending portions one to another and gifts to the poor. The Jews ordained and took upon themselves, and upon their seed, and upon those who joined them, that it is not to be revoked to make these 2 days according to their script and according to their appointed time every year. So, in the tradition and the fulfillment of this edict, which was later established by the great court of Moses, which is established, the record of which it was established in the law of Moses, you can find in Deuteronomy chapter 17 and other places in the Hebrew Bible. It has a biblical stamp of approval, and that is why it appears in the Hebrew Bible, because it was ordained by the courts that God ordained that we heed. An entire video unto itself. So let's begin. You are worthy of worship, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the reading of the Megillah. You are worthy of worship, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who performed miracles for our forefathers in those days at this time. Worshipful are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has granted us life, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this occasion. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus, he was the Ahasuerus, who reigned from India unto ancient Kush/Ethiopia, 127 provinces. ויהי בימי אחשורוש, הוא אחשורוש המלך מהודו עד כוש, 27 ומאה מדינה. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, the capital, ביומיהם כשבת המלך אחשורוש על כיסא מלכותו, אשר בשושן הבירה. In the 3rd year of his reign, he made a banquet for all his princes and his servants, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces who were before him. בשנת 3 למלכו עשה משתה לכל שרו ועבדו, חיל פורס ומודי, הפרטמים וסתורי המדינות לפניו. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty many days, yea, 180 days, بحرقثة أتعشر كبد ملخثة وآثقور تفآرث كذرلوثة يوميم ربيم شمونيم آثيوم. And when these days were over, the king made for all the people present in Shushan the capital, for everyone, both great and small, a banquet for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's orchard. وفيملث هيوميم هو إلا عصا همالخ لخول عام همين صقيم بشوشان هبيرا لم يقودر وعد قطان مشتا شبعت يوميم بحصار جناث بثان همالخ. There were spreads of white, fine cotton and blue, embroidered with cords of linen and purple, on silver rods and marble columns, couches of gold and silver, on a pavement of green, white, shell, and onyx marble. حور كرباس بخيلات أحوز بحبل أبوس وأرجمان على الجليل خاسف وعمود شاش مطاط ذهب وخسف على رصفات باهط وشش وضر وسحورات. And they gave them to drink in golden vessels, and the vessels differed from one another, and royal wine was plentiful according to the bounty of the king. وهشطف בכלי זהוב וכלים מכלים שונים, ויין מלכות רוב כיד המלך. And the drinking was according to the law, with no one coercing, for so had the king ordained upon every steward of his house, to do according to every man's wish. والشفيع خطاف إن أناس كي خان إصاد همالخ على كل ربثا لا عسف كي رقصن يشوئيش. Also Vashti the queen made a banquet for the women in the royal house of King Ahasuerus. גם واشتي همالكو عصثام يشتانوشيم بيت همالخوث أشر لمالخ أحشويرش. On the seventh day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he ordered Mehuman, Bizzetha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Karkas, the 7 chamberlains who ministered in the presence of King Ahasuerus. ביום השביעי כטוב לב המלך ביין אמר למהומן בספו חרבונו בגפו ואבגפו זתר וחרקס 7 הסוריסים המשורתים את פני המלך אחשוורוש. To bring Vashti the queen before the king with the royal crown, to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was of comely appearance. هوبي وشتي همال قولي فني همالخ بخاطر ملخوث لهرعث هو عميم وهالصوريم أثيوفيوه كي طوبت مرأة هي. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's behest, which was brought by the hand of the chamberlains, and the king became very wroth, and his anger burnt within him. وتمأنها ملكا واشتي لوفا بيدبار همالخ أشر بيدها الصوريسيم ويقصف همالخ مأذ وحموث بعرضا. And the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for so was the king's custom, to present the case before all who knew law and judgment. ويمر همالخ لا حقوميم يذعه عتيم كي خان دبر همالخ لفنا كل يذع الضوث وذي. عثري براس موضاي رأي بني همالخ هيو شبيم ريشونو بمالخوث. According to the law, what shall be done to Queen Vashti, inasmuch as she did not comply with the order of the king brought by the hand of the chamberlains? كذوث ما لا عسوث بمالكو واشتي على أشر لغوص ثاث ما أمر حمالخ حشويرش بياض حصوريسين. Then Memucan declared before the king and the officers, not against the king alone has Vashti the queen done wrong, but against all the princes, all the officers, and all the peoples that are in all of King Ahasuerus' provinces. ويامر بمخان لفني همالخ وهالصورين لا عن همالخ لبدا عوثا واشتي همالكو كي عن كل هالصورين وعن كلها عميم عشر بخور مدينة همالخ حشويرش. For the word of the queen will spread to all the women, to make them despise their husbands in their eyes. When they say, King Ahasuerus ordered to bring Vashti the queen before him, but she did not come. كي يصدبر حمالكو على كل هالنشيم لحفظت بعليهن بعينهن بأمرهم همالك أحشويرش أمره بيت واشتي همالكو لفانو ولفا. And this day the princesses of Persia and Media, who heard the word of the queen, will say the like to all the officers of the king, and there will be much contempt and wrath. وهيوم هزاء تمارنا صورث براس موضاي أشر شامعو أثدبر همالكو لخل صور همالخ أخذاي بزوين وقصاف. If it please the king, let a royal edict go forth from before him, and let it be inscribed in the laws of Persia and Media, and let it not be revoked, that Vashti shall not come before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to her peer, who is better than she. إمع الهمال خطب يصاد فرمان خث من لفنو ويكثب بذوث فراس موضاي ولا يعبر أثلا ثوب وشتي لفني همالخ حشورش ومالخوثه يتن همالخ لرعوثه حطبا ممنا. And let the verdict of the king be heard throughout his entire kingdom, although it is great, and all the women shall give honor to their husbands, both great and small. ونشمع بثغم همالخ أشار يا عسى بخول ملخثاء كي ربه وخور هالنوشيم يتنو يقور لبعليهان لم يقوذل وعذ قطام. And the matter pleased the king and the officers, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. ويطاب هالدبار بعينه همالخ وهالصوريم ويعس همالخ كذر مموخان. And he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to every province according to its script, and to every nationality according to its language, that every man dominate in his household and speak according to the language of his nationality. ويشلح سفوريم الكور مدينة همالخ المدينة مدينة كي خابه والعم وعم كل سنة ليه يذكر إيش سر ببثا ومدبر كل شان عما. After these events, when King Ahasuerus's fury subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decreed upon her. حماث همالخ أحشويرش زخرت وشتي وقت أشر عصاثا وقت أشر نغزار علاها. And the king's young men, his servants, said, let them seek for the king young maidens of comely appearance. ويمرون عليه همالخ نشورثو يبقشو لمالخ نعرث بثلث طوبث مرأة. And let the king appoint commissioners to all the provinces of his kingdom, and let them gather every young maiden of comely appearance to Shushan the capital, to the house of the women, to the custody of Hege, the king's chamberlain, the keeper of the women, and let their ointments be given them. ويفقد همالخ بقيدين بخور مدينة ملخث ويقبصوا أذكرنا عرب ثلو طبث مرأة الشوشان هبيرو البث هالنوشيم الياذ هغا سريس همالخ شمر هالنوشيم ونوثن تمرقهان. And let the maiden who pleases the king reign instead of Vashti. And the matter pleased the king, and he did so. وهانا عرو أشرتي طبعنا همالخ تملخ تاحت واشتي ويطاب هندور بعنا همالخ ويا عسكن. There was a Judean man in Shushan, the capital, whose name was Mordechai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. איש יהודי היה בשושן הבירה ושמו מרדכי בן יאיר בן שמעי בן קיש איש ימיני, who had been exiled from Jerusalem with the exile that was exiled with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had exiled. أشر هغلا ميروشلايم عم هجلا أشر هغلا فاعم يخانيا مالخ يهوذا أشر هغلا نبوخذ مالخ بابل. And he had brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maiden was of comely form and of comely appearance. And when her father and mother died, Mordechai took her to himself for a daughter. وهي أمن أث Hadassah he Esther bath the ki in lo of وهنا عرايفة ثأر والطوبة مرأة ذمت أبيها وإماه لقحاه مردخاي لباث. And it came to pass when the king's order and his decree were heard, and when many maidens were gathered to Shushan the capital, to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was taken to the king's house, to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the women. ويهي به الشمع دبر همالخ وضوثا وهي قابس نعرث ربث على شوشان هبيرة الياد هغاي وتلقى استر البيت همالخ الياد هغاي شمر هالناشيم. And the maiden pleased him, and she won his favor, and he hastened her ointments and her portions to give them to her, and the 7 maidens fitting to give her from the king's house, and he charged her and her maidens to the best portions in the house of the women. وتطاب حنا عرض ذعنو وتصاح استذلفانو وإذا هل أثمرقاها وأثمون الثاها لا ثاثلاه وأتشابعت حنا عرث هرؤيث لا ثاثلاه نبث همالخ ويشناها وأثنى عرثاها لطب بث النشيم. Esther did not reveal her nationality or her lineage, for Mordecai had ordered her not to reveal it. لا هجيذ أستر أث عماه وأث ملعظته كي مردخاي سوى له أشر لثاجيذ. And every day Mordecai would walk about in front of the court of the house of the women to learn of Esther's welfare and what would be done to her. בכל יום ויום מרדכי מתהלך לפני חסר בית הנשים לא דעת את שלום אסתר ומה יעשה בה. And when each maiden's turn arrived to go to King Ahasuerus, after having been treated according to the practice prescribed for the women, for 12 months, for so were the days of their ointments completed, 6 months with myrrh oil, and 6 months with perfumes, and with the ointments of the women. كذوف النوشي مشني معصور حذاش كي كان يملأوا يمام الروقهان شيشا حضوشين بشامن همر وشيشا حضوشين بب الصميم وفثام روقه النوشيم. Then with this the maiden would come to the king. Whatever she would request would be given to her to come with her from the house of the women to the king's house. وظهن عرباء الهمالخ إذ كل أشر تمار ينوثن له لبا عمه نبت النوشين عذبت همالخ. In the evening she would go, and in the morning she would return to the second house of the women, to the custody of Shashgaz, the king's chamberlain, the guard of the concubines. She would no longer come to the king unless the king wanted her, and she was called by name. وعارف هي ضاء وبقر هي شوفو البيت هالنوشيم شاني الياد شاعش غز سريس همالخ شمر هبيلغ شيم لا طبعد الهمالخ كي محفظ با همالخ ونقرأ بالشام. Now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, Mordecai's uncle, who had taken her for a daughter, came to go in to the king, she requested nothing, except what Hegai, the king's chamberlain, the guard of the women, would say. And Esther obtained grace in the eyes of all who beheld her. ובהגיעתר אסתר בת אביחיל דוד מרדכי אשר לא תחלה לבeth לא אל המלך לא ביקשו דבר כי אם את אשר יאמר הרי סריס המלך שמר הנשים ותהי אסתר נשאתהן בעיני כל רעהו. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to his royal house in the 10th month, which is in the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. وتلقح أستر اذهب ملك أحشويروش البيت ملكثا بحدش هو عسيري وحدش طبث بشنف شبع لما الخثاء. And the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor before him more than all the maidens. And he placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. وجاءها همالخ أستر ميكول هالناشيم وتصاح وحاسد لفنا ميكول هب ثلاث وياسم كاثر ملخوث برشاه ويملخها تحت وشتي. And the king made a great banquet for all his princes, officers, and his servants, even Esther's feast, and he granted a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the bounty of the king. ويعس همالخ مشتغل لخور الصرا وعوضو إث مشتا أستر وهنحو لمدينة عصا ويتن مسئث كياد همالخ. And when the maidens were gathered a second time, and Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate, وهقوبس بثلث شنيف ومردخاي يشف بشاعر همالخ. Esther would not tell her lineage or her nationality, as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther kept Mordecai's orders as she had when she was raised by him. And Esther مجادت مولاتها وإذ عماه كأشر استوى علىها مردخاي وإذ ما أمر مردخاي أستر عصا كأشر هيثا بأمنا إته. In those days when Mordecai was sitting in the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, of the guards of the threshold, became angry, and sought to lay a hand on King Ahasuerus. فيوميم هم ومردخاي يشف بشاعر همالخ قصف بغفان وثارش شناس صوري سهمالخ بشمري هالصاف ويبقشون يشلوح يوذ بمالخ Ahasuerus. And the matter became known to Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told it to the king in Mordecai's name. ويوضع الدغر مردخاي ويجد لأستر همالكو وتمر أستر الملخ بشم مردخاي. And the matter was investigated and found to be so, and they were both hanged on a gallows. And it was written in the diary that was read before the king. ويبقاش هالدبر ويمص ويبطلوش نهم على العز ويكوثف بسافر دبري هاليومين إثني همالخ. After these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite and advanced him and placed his seat above all the officers who were with him. أحر هالدبوريم هائلا كيدا الهمالخ أحشويرش أث همان بان هم غفاها أغاضي وينسأه وياسم أث كسأ مع الكل هالصوريم أشر إتا. And all the king's servants who were in the king's gate would kneel and prostrate themselves before Haman, for so had the king commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would neither kneel nor prostrate himself. وخل عبد همالخ أشر بالشاعر همالخ كرعيم وميشتا حويم لهمان كي خن والله همالخ ومردخاي لا يخرع ولا يشتا حوا. Then the king's servants who were in the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's orders?" ويمروا عبد همالخ أشر بشاعر همالخ مردخاي مدوع الطعبر إثم يصوف همالخ. Now it came to pass when they said this to him daily, and he did not heed them, that they told this to Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would stand up, for he had told them that he was a Jew. ويهي كأمرهم إلايم ويم ولا شمع عليهم ويجيد لهمان لرأس هيا عمذو دبر مردخاي كي هجد لهم أشر هو يهودي. And when Haman saw that Mordecai would neither kneel nor prostrate himself before him, Haman became full of wrath. ويرحمون كي إن مردخاي كرع وميشتاح وإلا ويمالهم حما. But it seemed contemptible to him to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him Mordecai's nationality, and Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout Ahasuerus's kingdom, Mordecai's people. ويفاز بعينه ليشلو وحيوذ بمردخاي لغدك يهيجيدو لا أثعم مردخاي ويبقش هون لهشميد أثكول هيهذيم أشر بخول ملخث أحشورش عم مردخاي. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of the king Ahasuerus, one cast the pur, that is, the lot, before Haman from day to day and from month to month, to the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. بحدش هوريشن وحدش نيسان بيشناث شتن معسرة لما لخ أحشورش يبيل بور هو هجرول لفني همون من يوم ليوم حدش لحدش شنم معصر وحدش أذار. And Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and separate among the peoples throughout all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws differ from those of every people, and they do not keep the king's laws. It is therefore of no use for the king to let them be. ويمر همان لما لقى حشويرش يشنع أحوذ مفزور مفروض بينها عمين دخل مدينة ثم الملك فاخو وذو فهم شنث مكل عم وأثدو فهم مالخ إنهم عسيم ولما لخ إن شوى لهالنحام. If it pleases the king, let it be written to destroy them, and I will weigh out 10,000 silver talents into the hand of those who perform the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries. يكثب لأبذوم وعسارث ألوفيم كيكار كاسف أشقل عن يذي عسى هم الأخا لهوبي الجنز هم هلاخ. And the king took his ring off his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the adversary of the Jews. ويسر همالخ أثطبعت مع اليوذا ويتناه لهمان بان همض ذفا هو أرغي صرر هيهذيم. And the king said to Haman, the silver is given to you, and the people do to them as it pleases you. ويمر همالخ لهمان كاسف نوثن لوخ وهو عم لا عسف بكتب بعناخا. And the king's scribes were summoned in the first month, on the 13th day thereof, and it was written according to everything that Haman had ordered to the king's satraps, and to the governors who were over every province, and to the officers of every people, each province according to its script, and each people according to its tongue. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and it was sealed with the king's ring. ويقرأوا سفر همالخ بحدش هاريشن بشلش عصر يام با ويكثف كخول شرسي وهمان الأحش دربانه همالخ والهبحث أشر على مدينة والصر عم وعم مدينة كخفابه وعم وعم كل سنة بشم همالخ حشورش نخطاب ونحتم بالطباعة همالخ. And the letters shall be sent by the hand of the couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, kill, and cause to perish all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, on one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and their spoils to be taken as plunder. ونشلوح سفوريم بياض هوروسيم أنكور مدينة همالخ لها شميث لها رغل أبادث كل هيهذيم منا عروع زقن طف ونوشيم بيوم حوض بيشلوشو عصر لحدش نام عصر وحدش عذار بيشلولم لوفيز. The copy of the writ was for an edict to be given in every province, published to all the peoples, to be ready for that day. Sharon hakthov lehinnochthen doth b'chol medino golui lechol ha'amim lihyot atidhim leyom hazeh. The couriers went forth in haste by the king's order, and the edict was given in Shushan the capital. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, and the city of Shushan was perturbed. هرافيم يصعود حفيم بذبر همالخ وهدوث نتنا بشوشان هبيرا وهمالخ وهمان يشو لشتث وهعير شوشان نوفخا. And Mordecai knew all that had transpired. And Mordecai rent his clothes and put on a sackcloth and ashes, and he went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. مردخاي يضاعف كل شرنا عصا ويقرع مردخاي أثبغضو ويلبش صق وآفر ويصاب الثخعير ويزعق زعق غذلو أمرا. And he came up as far as the king's gate, for one may not enter the king's gate dressed in sackcloth. ويوفى لفنا شاعر همالخ كي إن لوفى الشاعر همالخ بلفوش صوق. And in every province, wherever the king's orders and his edict reached, there was great mourning for the Jews, and fasting and weeping and lamenting. Sackcloth and ashes were put on the most prominent. بخول مدينة ومدينة مقوم أشر دبر همالخ وضوثة مجياع برقوض اليهوديم وصم أبخي ومسباذ سقوى آفر يصع لربين. And Esther's maidens and her chamberlains came and told her, and the queen was extremely terrified, and she sent clothing to dress Mordecai, and to take off his sackcloth, but he did not accept it. وَاتَّبَنَا نعرض أستر بالصوريسة ويجيذ له وتتحلحل همالكو مأذ وتشلح بغوذيم لهالبيشة مردوخاي والحصير سق ما علو والقبال. And then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed before her, and she commanded him concerning Mordecai to know what this was and why this was. وتقرأ أستر لها هفخ مصريسة همالخ أشرها عميد لفناه وتصواه على المردخاي لو ضاعت مزة وعلى المزة. So Hathach went forth to Mordechai, to the city square, which was before the king's gate. ويص هثخ المردخاي الرحوف عير أشر لفنا شاعر همالخ. And Mordecai told him all that had befallen him, and the full account of the silver that Haman had proposed to weigh out into the king's treasuries on the Jews' account, to cause them to perish. وَيَجَّذْ لَمَرْدُخَاي إِذْ كَرَ أَشَرْ قَرَاهُ وإذ بارشاف كاسف أشر عمرهم لشقل عن جنزاه مالخ باليهودين لأبذون. And the copy of the writ of the decree that was given in Shushan he gave him, to show Esther and to tell her, and to order her to come before the king, to beseech him, and to beg him for her people. وإذ פתשרן כתוב הדוth أشر ניתן בשושן להשמידום נותן לה להראות את אסתר ולהגיד לו ולصوت עליה לעובל המלך להתחנן לה ולבקש מלפונו على عماه. And Hathach came, and he told Esther and Mordecai, and he told Esther what Mordecai had said. ويوفى Hathach ويجد لأستر إث دبر مردخاي. And Esther said to Hathach, and she ordered him to tell Mordecai, وتمر أستر لحثach وتصواه المردخاي. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that any man or woman who comes to the king into the inner court, who is not summoned, there is but one law for him, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king extends the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been summoned to come to the king these 30 days. كل عذاب همالخ وعم دينوث همالخ يوذعم أشر كوريش وإشون أشر يوما الأهمالخ إلها حصر هبنيميث أشر لا يقارن أحث دوث ميث لذا أشر يشيط لا همالخ أشربط هالذهب وحيا وأني لا نقرثي لوفا الهمالخ زا شلوشيم يوم. And they told Esther's words to Mordechai. وَيَجِدُوا لَمَرْدَخَيْ دِبْرَ أَسْتَرَ. And Mordechai ordered to reply to Esther, do not imagine to yourself that you will escape in the king's house from among all the Jews. وَيَمَرْ مَرْدَخَيْ لَهَشِيب الْأَسْتَرَ أَنْ تَذَمِّي بنفسك لهمولت بيت همالك مِكَول هَيَهُدِيم. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and rescue will arise for the Jews from elsewhere, and you and your father's household will perish. And who knows whether at a time like this you will attain the kingdom. כי אם החרשת חרישים בועט הזף روح وهالصلاة يا عمر ليهودي من مقام أحر وعد أوفت أبيخ تباذو ومي يذاع إملعت كوزث هيقاعث لما الخوث. Could also be read, and who knows if for a time such as this you have arrived to royalty. Then Esther ordered to reply to Mordechai. وَتُمَرْ أَسْتَرْ لَهَشِيب el-Mordechai. Go, assemble all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, day and night. Also I and my maidens will fast in a like manner. Then I will go to the king contrary to the law, and if I perish, I perish. לך כנס את כל היהודים הנמצאים בשושן ושמו עלי ואל תאכלו ואל תשתו 3 ימים לילה ויום גם אני ונערותיי אصوم כן ובכן אובה אל המלך אשר לחדש וכאשר עבדתי. So Mordechai passed and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. ويعبر مردخاي ويعس كخرش رسم وفاعل أستر. Now it came to pass on the 3rd day that Esther clothed herself regally, and she stood in the inner court of the king's house, opposite the king's house, and the king was sitting on his royal throne in the royal palace, opposite the entrance of the house. ويهي بيوم هالشليشي وتلبش أستر ملخوث وتعمد بحصر بيت همالخ بنيميث لخح بيت همالخ وهمالخ يشاب عن كيس ملخوث ببيت همالخوث لخح تفح بايث. And it came to pass when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she won favor in his eyes, and the king extended to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. ويشط همالخ لا أستر شربط هالذهب أشر بيوضا وتقرب أستر وتيقع برش هالشربيط. And the king said to her, what concerns you, Queen Esther, and what is your petition? Even to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. ويمر له همالخ ملخ أستر همالكو وما بقو شوفخ على حسي همالخوث وينوفن لخ. And Esther said, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. وتمر أستر مع الهمالخ طوف يوب همالخ وهمان هيم الهمشتا أشر عسيثي لا. And the king said, rush Haman to do Esther's bidding. And the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. ويمر همالخ ما هرو أث همان لا عسث أث دبر أستر ويوبه مالك وهمون الهم يشتاق أشر عاصفة أستير. And the king said to Esther during the wine banquet, "What is your petition? It shall be granted to you. And what is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it shall be fulfilled." ويامر همالخ أستر بمشتا هياين مش فخ ويناثن لخ وما بقى الشفخ على حسي همالخوث والثعاس. Then Esther replied and said, "My petition and my request are as follows. وَتَا عن أستر وَتْهُمار شَئِلَثِي وَقَّشَثِي." If I have found favor in the king's eyes, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I will make for them, and tomorrow I will do the king's bidding. إمصافحا بعنا همالخ وإمع همالخ طوب رثث أثشئلثي ولا عسث أثقق شثي يوبا همالخ وهمان الهم مشتاشر أعسالهم ومحار أعسى كذبر همالخ. And Haman went out on that day, happy and with a cheerful heart. But when Haman saw Mordechai in the king's gate, and he neither rose nor stirred because of him, Haman was filled with wrath against Mordechai. ويصى همان بيمهه سمح وطوبله وخرأت همان أث مردخاي بشاعر همالف ولقم ولزع ممنو ويماله همان على مردخاي هما. But Haman restrained himself, and he came home, and he sent and brought his friends and Zeresh his wife. ويثأفق همان ويوبا البثا ويشلح ويوبا أثاهبو وأثزارش إشتا. And Haman recounted to them the glory of his riches and the multitude of his sons, and all the ways that the king had promoted him, and that he had exalted him over the officers and the king's servants. ويسبر لهم همان أثكباد عشر وربنا وأذكر شرديد لهم مالخ وأثأشر نساء على حصوريم وعبدهم مالخ. And Haman said, "Esther did not even bring anyone to the party that she made except me, and tomorrow too I invited to her with the king." ويمر همان أفلا هذه أستر هم القاعم هم مالخ الهم يشتا أشر عصافة كي إمأثي وغم المحار أني قروله عم هم مالخ. But all this is worth nothing to me every time I see Mordechai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. وخرزة أنا نوش وعلي بخل عث أشر أني رأت مردخاي هيهودي يشرب بشعر همالاف. And Zeresh his wife and all his friends said, "Let them make a gallows 50 cubits high, and in the morning say to the king that they should hang Mordechai on it, and go to the king to the banquet joyfully." The matter pleased Haman, and he made the gallows. والتمر لزرش يشتاق خلقه يا عسوعس قبو وحميشيم أما ببقر أمر لما لخ ويثبو أثمر دوخي علو بعيم همالخ الهم يشتاق صميح ويطاب هدور لفنه همان ويا عسوعس. On that night, the king's sleep was disturbed, and he ordered to bring the book of the records, the chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written that Mordechai had reported about Bigthana and Teresh, two chamberlains of the king, of the guards of the threshold, who had sought to lay a hand on King Ahasuerus. ويمص خصوف أشر هجير مردخاي على بغفانا وثارش شنس أرنسا مالخ يشمر الصف أشر بقشول لشلو وحيوض بمالخ أحشويرش. And the king said, "What honor and greatness was done to Mordechai on that account?" And the king's servants who ministered before him said, "Nothing was done for him." ويمر همالخ منا عصا يقر اغذو الله لمردخي عنزة ويمرو ناعره مالخ مشورثو لنا عصا عم دغار. And the king said, who was in the court? And Haman had come to the outside court of the king's house to petition the king to hang Mordechai on the gallows that he had prepared for him. وَيَّمَرْ هَمَّانَخ مِيبَا حُصِرْ مِيبَا حُصِرْ وهمن بالا حصار بيت همالخ ها حصانو لمر غمالخ لثلاثة مردخاي على هاعس أشر هخين لا. And the king's servant said to him, behold, Haman is standing in the court. And the king said, let him enter. وَيَّمَرُوا نَاعَرِ هَمَّالَخْ أَلَو هِنَّ هَمَنْ عِمَذْ بَحُصِرْ وَيَّمَرْ هَمَّالَخْ يَوْبَا. And Haman entered, and the king said to him, what should be done to a man whom the king wishes to honor? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king wish to honor more than me? وَيَّوْبَا هَمَنْ وَيَمَرْ لَا هَمَّالَخْ مَلَّا عَسَثْ بَإِيش أَشَرْ هَمَّالَخْ حُفَسْ بِي قَرَى وَيَّمَرْ هَمَنْ بَلِبَالَمْ يَحْفَصْ هَمَّالَخْ لَا عَسَثْ يُقَرْ يَثَرْ مِمَّنِّي. And Haman said to the king, a man whom the king wishes to honor. وَيَّمَرْ هَمَنْ الْهَمَّالَخْ إِيش أَشَرْ هَمَّالَخْ حُفَسْ بِي قَرَى. Let them bring the royal raiment that the king wore, and the horse that the king rode upon, and the royal crown should be placed on his head. يَوْفِيءُ لُبُشْ مَلْخُوث أَشَرْ لُبَشْ بَهَمَّالَخْ وَسُوس أَشَرْ رُخَبْ عَلَى هَمَّالَخْ وَأَشَرْ نِتَّان كَاثَرْ مَلْخُوث بَرَشَا. And let the raiment and the horse be delivered into the hand of one of the king's most noble officers, and let them dress the man whom the king wishes to honor, and let them parade him on the horse in the city square, and announce before him, so shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor. ونوثان هلبوش وحسوس عليان إيش مصاري همالخ هبرتمين وهلبيشو أثو إيش أشر همالخ حفس بي قرى وهركبوه على السوس برحو عير وقرؤوا لفونو كوخو عسالو إيش أشر همالخ حفس بي قرى. And the he dressed Mordechai and paraded him in the city square and announced before him, so shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor. ويقح همون أثلبوش وأثسوس ويلبش أثمردخاي ويركباه برحب هعير ويقرأ لفنو كاخي عسارو إيش أشار همالخ حفظ بقرا. And Mordechai returned to the king's gate, and Haman rushed home, mourning with his head covered. ويابش مردخاي الشاعر همالخ وهمن يضحف البثاء and Haman recounted to Zeresh his wife and to all his friends all that had befallen him. And his wise men and Zeresh his wife said to him, if Mordechai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish stock, you will not prevail against him, but you will surely fall before him. ويسبر همان لزارش إشتون وخول هبعوث كل أشر قروه ويمر لا حخامه وزارش إشتا إم مزارع يهودي مردخاي أشرها حل ثانين بل ثانا لثو خل كينو فنتي بل لثانا. While they were still talking to him, the king's chamberlains arrived and hastened to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. عظم ذبري معما وصاري سهما لخيجيعو ويبهيلو له بيت همان الهم يشتاق شرع صفا استر. So the king and Haman came to drink with Queen Esther. And the king said to Esther also on the second day during the wine feast, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be given to you. And what is your request, even up to half the kingdom? And it shall be granted." ويومر همالخ لأستر جنب يوم هشاني بمشتهيين مشقالو ثاخ أستر همالكو وانتي نوثلوخ وما بقو شوثاخ على حصي همالخوث وثاعوس. And Queen Esther replied and said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, O king, and if it pleases the king, may my life be given me in my petition, in my people, in my request." وتها أستر همالكو وتمار يا مصوفي حين بعنا خو همالخ ومع الهمالخ طو تنوثلي نفشي بيشقالوثي وعمي ببقوشوثي. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. Now had we been sold for slaves and bondswomen, I would have kept silent. But for adversary but for the adversary has no consolation, for the adversary has no consideration for the king's loss. כי נמכרנו אני ועמי להשמיד להרוג ולאבד ואילו לעבודים ולשפוחות נמכרנו החרשתי כי אין הסור שווה בנזק המלך. It's better to translate this last portion of the verse. I would have kept silent, but the sorrow, the distress isn't worth it for the destruction that would come of the king, or the destruction that would befall the king as a result of all that being destroyed. And King Ahasuerus said, and he said to Queen Esther, "Who is this? And where is he? Who dared to do this?" ويمر همالك أحشورش ويمر لأستر همالكو ميهوزا وإزاهو أشر ملو أليب لا عصف كان. And Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, this evil Haman became terrified before the king and the queen. وتمر أستر إيش صار وأيف همون هرعز وهمون يبعث من لفنه ملخ وهملكو. And the king arose in his fury from the wine feast to the orchard garden, and Haman stood to beg for his life of Queen Esther, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. وهمالخ باحموثا من مشتهيين الجمات هبيثون وهمان عماد لبقش على نفسه ما أستر همالكو كي رأى كي خالثا إله رعنت همالخ. Then the king returned from the orchard garden to the house of the wine feast, and Haman was falling on the couch upon which Esther was. And the king said, Will you even coerce the wife? Will you even coerce the queen with me in the house? This is an idiom for rape. The word came out of the king's mouth, and they had already covered Haman's face. البث مشتهيين وهمان نفل عن هم الطاء أشر أستر علاها ويومر همالخ هغملخ بوش أثهم الكاعمي ببايث الدوار يصام البي همالخ أفناهم حفو. Then said Harbona, one of the chamberlains before the king, Also behold the gallows that Haman made for Mordechai, who spoke well for the king, standing in Haman's house, 50 cubits high. And the king said, Hang him on it. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the adversary of the Jews, and Mordecai came before the king because Esther had told him what he was to her.
ביום ההוא נתן המלך אחשוורוש לאסתר המלכו את בית המן שורר היהודים ומרדכי בא לפני המלך כי הגידו אסתר מהו לו.
And the king took off his ring, which he had removed from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther placed Mordecai in charge of the house of Haman.
ويصار همالخ اطبعت أشرها عبير ما همان ويتناه لمردخاي والتصم أسترأت مردخاي علبة همان.
And Esther resumed speaking before the king, and she fell before his feet, and she wept and beseeched him to avert the harm of Haman the Agagite and his devisings that he had plotted against the Jews.
وتصف أستر وتدبر لفنى همالخ وتكل لفنى رلو وتتحنن لها عبر رأس همان هو أغاغي وأث ما حشبت أشر حشب على اليهوديم.
Then the king extended the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther arose and stood before the king.
ويشط همالخ لأستر أث شربيط هالزهاب وتقم أستر وتعمد لفنى همالخ.
And she said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the matter is proper before the king, and I am good in his sight, let it be written to rescind the letters, the devisings of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces.
وتمار مع الهمالخ طوب وإما صافح لفانه وخشير هالدبر لفن همالخ وطوب أني بعينه يكوثب له شيء أث هالسفوريم مع حشابة هامون بأن هم ضفا وأراغي أشر كوثب لأبدادة هاليهوديم أشر بخول مدينة همالخ.
For how can I see the evil that would befall my people? And how can I see the destruction of my kindred?
هي خخا وخال ورئيسي بارع أشر يمصائف عمي وخخا وخال ورئيسي بأبدان نلعفتي.
Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, the house of Haman I have given to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he laid a hand on the Jews.
ويومر همالخ أحشويروش لأستر همالكو والمردخاي هاليهودي هن بيت همون نوثاتي لأستر وثا طلوع الهعس على شرشو لحيوض بيهودين.
And you, write about the Jews as you see fit, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For a writ that is written in the name of the king, and sealed with the king's ring, cannot be rescinded.
وأتم كتبوا على اليهودين كالطوب بعين خام بالشم همالخ وحثموا بالطباعث همالخ كي يخطوب الشابر نخطوب بالشم همالخ ونحتم بالطباعث همالخ إنه شيب.
And the king's scribes were summoned at that time, in the 3rd month, that is, the month of Sivan, on the 33rd day thereof, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded, to the Jews and to the satraps and to the governors and to the officers of the provinces, from India unto Cush, the region south of Egypt. 177 provinces, every province according to its script, and every nationality according to its tongue, and to the Jews according to their script and according to their tongue.
ويقرأوا سفر همالخ باعثه بحدش هالشليشي بحدش سيوان بشلوشا وعسرين ذا ويكفف كخول أشار سيوا مردخي ألها اليهوديم وألها حش دربانيم وهبا حث والصوري هم مدينة أشر ما هدو وعذ كوش شبع وعسرين ومئة مدينة مدينة كي خطابه وعم كل سنة وقال هاليهوديم كي خطابهم وخلق سنة.
And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it in the king's ring, and he sent letters by the couriers on horseback, the riders of the king's steeds, the camels, bred of the dromedaries.
ويخطب باسم همالخ أحشوروش ويحتم بطباعة همالخ ويشلح سفورين بياض هوروسيم بسوسيم رخبه هورخش هو أحش تربنيم بني هورمخيم.
That the king had given to the Jews who are in every city the right to assemble and to protect themselves, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish the entire host of every people and province that oppresses them, small children and women, and to take their spoils for plunder.
أشر نوثان همالخ ليهوديم أشر بخول عير وعير الهقاهل ولا عمود على نفشوم لها شميد ولا هر ولا باد أذكول حل عم أمذينا حصوريم أثام طفقون وشيم قشلالهم لافز.
And one day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar,
بيوم أحوذ بخول مدينة همالخ أحشويرش بيشلشو عصر لحيدش النم عصر لحيدش أذار.
the copy of the writ was that an edict be given in every province, published before all the peoples, and that the Jews be ready for that day, to avenge themselves upon their enemies.
هتخاشن هكثوف الهنو ثندوث بخول مدينة قلوي لا خولها عميم لهياتها يهوديم عثيذيم ليوم هزا لهنو قم ما ويذاهم.
The couriers, those who ride the king's steeds, the camels, went out hastened and pressed by the king's order, and the edict was given in Shushan, the capital.
هرصيم رخبه هرخش وها حشترانيم يوصقوم ذهوليم وذحفيم بذبار همالخ وهالطاف نتنا بشوشان هبيرا.
And Mordechai left the king's presence with royal raiment, blue and white, and a huge golden crown and a wrap of linen and purple. And the city of Shushan shouted and rejoiced.
ومردخاي يصوم لفنا همالخ بيلوش ملخوث تخالث وحر وعطى رفضهم قذلو والتخريخ بوص وأرجمون وهعير شوشون صوها الله وسمحه.
The Jews had light and joy and gladness and honor.
لا يهوديم هاي ثور وسمحه وصوصن وقار.
And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's order and his edict reached, there was joy and gladness for the Jews, a banquet and a festive day. And many of the peoples of the land became Jews, because the fear of the Jews was upon them.
بخول مدينة وبخول عير وعير مقام أشر دبر همالخ وضوث مقيع سمحة وصوصن لا يهودي مشتاوي ينطب وربي ما عمه رسمت يا هذيم كينو فالباحث هاي يهوديم عليهم.
And in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day thereof, when the king's order and his edict drew near to be put into execution, on the day that the king's enemies looked forward to ruling over them, it was reversed. The Jews should rule over their enemies.
وبيشنم عصر حداش بحداش أدور بشلوشو عصر يوم أشر هنجي عند فرح مالك وضوثالها عصت بيوم أشر سيبرو أي بها يهودين لشلط بهم ولا هفخه أشر يشلطوها يهودين هم بسنئهم.
The Jews assembled in their cities, in all their provinces of King Ahasuerus, to lay hand on those who sought to harm them, and no one stood up before them, for their fear had fallen upon all the peoples.
يقحلوا هاليهودين بعارهم بخول مدينة ثم لخا حشويرش ليشلو وحيوذ بمذقش راعثهم ويشلو عما ذلثناهم كينو فالبحدهم الكل هو عميم. And all the officers of the provinces and the satraps and the governors and those that conduct the king's affairs elevated the Jews, for the fear of Mordechai fell upon them. وخرصورهم مدينة وهو حشتر بنيم وها بحث وعساهم ملوخو أشر ملاخ من السئيم أتها يهوديم كينو فالباحث مردخاي عليهم. For Mordechai was great in the king's house, and his fame went forth throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordechai waxed greater and greater. כי עובר מרדכי בבית המלך ושומעו הלך בכל המדינות כי הוא איש מרדכי הלך וגובל. And the Jews smote all their enemies with a stroke of the sword, and with slaying and destruction, and they did to their enemies as they wished. ويكو اليهوديم بخول أيديهم مكث حارب وهرغ وأبذهم ويعسوا بسنيهم كربصنهم. And in Shushan the capital the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. وبشوشان هبيرو رغوها يهوديم وأبذ حمش مئة إيش. And Parshandatha and Darfun and Aspatha and Purtha and Adalia and Aridatha and Parmashta and Arisai and Aridai and Vaizdatha. بشوشان هبيرا هرغو هيهوديم وأباد حمش مئة إيش. وإذ Parshandatha وإذ Dalfun وإذ Aspatha وإذ Purtha وإذ Adalia وإذ Aridatha وإذ Parmashta وإذ Arisai وإذ Aridai وإذ Vaizatha. The 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the adversary of the Jews, they slew, but on the spoil, they did not lay their hands. عسرت بن همان بن حمدثا صرر هيهوديم هراغو وبيزال شالح أثياضام. On that day, the number of those slain in Shushan the capital came before the king. ביום ההוא בו מספר ההרוגים בשושן הבירה לפני המלך. And the king said to Queen Esther, in Shushan the capital the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men, and the 10 sons of Haman. In the rest of the king's provinces, what have they done? Now, what is your petition? And it shall be granted you. And what is your request? And it shall be done. ويامر همالخ لأستير همالكم بشوشان هبيرو هورغو هاليهودي وأباد حمش مئذيش وإذ عسرت بنيهم هون بيشعور مدينو همالخ نعسو وما الشئلوثخ وينوثنلخ وما بقوشوثخ عذ وثعاس. And Esther said, if it please the king, let tomorrow too be granted to the Jews to do as today's decree, and let them hang Haman's 10 sons on the gallows. وتمر أستر مع الهمال خطاب النوثن دم حور لا يهودي مشر بشوشان لا in the 14th day of Adar as well, and they slew in Shushan 300 men, but upon the spoils they did not lay their hands. ويقاتلوا اليهوديم أشر بشوشان قام بيوم 14 ل11 أذار ويهرغوا بشوشان 300 إيش غبي زار شالح وأثياضهم. And the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled and protected themselves and had rest from their enemies and slew their foes. 75,000. But upon the and made it a day of feasting and joy. بيوم 13 ل11 أذار ونوح ب14 وعسى أثا يوم مشتاق والسمحة. And the Jews who were in Shushan assembled on the 13th thereof, and on the 14th thereof, and rested on the 15th thereof, and made it a day of feasting and joy. وهاليهوديم أشر بشوشان قالوا ب13 با وب14 با ونوح ب15 با وعسى أثا يوم يشتاق والسمحة. Therefore, the Jewish villagers who live in open towns make the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of joy and feasting and a festive day, and of sending portions to one another. عن كان هاليهوديم هالبروزيم هاليوشبيم بعري هالبروزات عسيم أثيوم 14 ل11 أذار سمحوا ميشتاوي يوم طاب وميشلوح منوث إيش لرعاهو. And Mordechai inscribed these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far. ويختار مردخاي את הדבורים האלה ويشلح ספורים אל כל היהודים אשר בכל מדינות המלך אחשוורוש הקרובים והרחוקים, to enjoin them to make the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day thereof every year. تقايم عليهم ليهيوث عسيم أثيوم 14 ل11 أذار وأثيوم 15 بخل شونو وشونو, as the days when the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month that was reversed for them from grief to joy and from mourning to a festive day, to make them days of feasting and joy, and sending portions one to another, and gifts to the poor. كيوميم أشر لحوبهم يهوديم أويبهم وحدش أشر نهخ لهم يوغل سمحة أما أبل ليوم طوب لا عسث ثوم يما مشتا والسمحة ومش لو وحمونث إش لرعاه وما طونث لا أبيانيم. And the Jews took upon themselves what they had commenced to do, and what Mordechai had written to them. وقبال هاليهوديم إث أشر هحلو لا عسث وإث أشر كثب مردخاي عليهم. For Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the adversary of all the Jews, had devised to destroy the Jews, and he cast the pur, that is the lot, to terrify them and destroy them. He Haman ben Hammedatha ها أغوغي صر كل هاليهوديم حشب على هاليهوديم لأبذوم وهي بيلبوره هجرال لهم لأبذوم. And when she came before the king, he commanded through letters that his evil devisings that he had devised against the Jews return upon his own head, and to destroy him and his sons on the gallows. לפני המלך אומר עם הספר ישוב מה חשבתו רעו אשר חשב על היהודים על ראשו وطلعته وأثمنه على العرس. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, and what they saw concerning this matter, and what happened to them. على كن قارئوا اليوم يمه إلا فوريم على شمه بور على كن على كن ديفريه إجارة هزوث وما رؤوا على كاخو ما هجيع عليهم. The Jews ordained and took upon themselves and upon their seed and upon all those who joined them, that it be not revoked to make these 2 days according to their script and according to their appointed time every year. قيموا وقبلوا هاليهوديم عليهم وعلى زرعهم وعلى كل هالنيلويم عليهم ولا يعبر الإهيود عسيم أثشنا هاليوميم هو إلا كخفوبهم وخزمنهم بخل شانا وشانا. And these days shall be remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, in every family, every province, and every city. And these days of Purim shall not be revoked amidst the Jews, and their memory shall not cease from their seed. وهيوميم هو إلا مذكوريم وناعسين بخضر ونار مشبحة مدينة وعير وعير وما بوريم هو إلا لا يعبروا متاخ يهوديم وذكرهم لا يوصف مزرعهم. Now Queen Esther, the daughter of Avihail, and Mordechai the Jew, wrote down all the acts of power to confirm the second Purim letter. وتخطب أستر هم الكوبة أبيحيل ومردخاي اليهودي إذ كنت قف لقيم إذ إجارة بوريم هزوث هالشميث. And he sent letters to all the Jews to 127 provinces, the realm of Ahasuerus, words of peace and truth. ويشلح سفورين أن كل اليهوديم على شابع وعسرين ومآمدينهم أن خطا أحشويروش ديفرين شولم وأماث. To confirm these days of Purim in their appointed times, as Mordechai the Jew and Esther the queen had enjoined them, and as they had ordained for themselves and for their seed, the matters of the fasts and their cry. لقيم أثيمها بوريم هو إلا بيزمنهم كأشر قيام عليهم مردخاي اليهودي وأستر هم الكوم وكأشر قيموا على نفسهم وعلى زرعهم دبر الصمت وزعقفهم. Now Esther's order confirmed these matters of Purim, and it is inscribed in the book. And it was inscribed in the book. وما أمر أستر قيام دبر بوريم هو إلا ونخطب بالسفر. And King Ahasuerus imposed the tribute on the land and on the isles of the sea. ويوسم همالخ أحشويروش ما سأله راس وإياهم يوم. And all the acts of his power and his might, and the full account of Mordechai's greatness, how the king advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? وخل ما عسى ثقفة وخل ما عسى ثقفة أغبرثا وفارشات قدرات مردخاي أشر قد الله مالخ هلهم كتوبين على سفر دبرها يومين لما الخيمضاي وفاراس. For Mordechai the Jew was viceroy to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted by most of his brethren, seeking the good of his people, and speaking peace to all their seed. כי מרדכי היהודי משנה למלך אחשוורוש وغضل ליהודים ורסו לרבחו درش طوب العمة وهذا برسولم لخور زرعه.